So,
Uh,
welcome to the Imba bi-weekly community meeting. We are.
Yep.
Is the date correct? 25th.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. So these are the suggested topics, and we can go through them the way it's proposed, or we can use new ones. So, yeah, we can do whatever we really want to right now, currently. So, what do you think?
I think it looks good. I can add one point of just yeah.
Yes.
So since the last time, I don't exactly remember what the state was, but I've done quite a bit of work on the new website, mostly like basic documentation and setting up the playground environment and stuff like that. So we can go through that. And yeah, what was the status of styles the last meeting?
I think it's at the end, isn't it? Or
yeah, but was it?
I think Eric had proposed some things, and you were thinking about it, and I think we got to the stage where you said you wanted to spend time on it.
So it wasn't actually even started at that point.
I don't know if you had a private branch or something, but
I don't think I had.
It wasn't public, at least. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I don't think I had. So so we've had some good progress then since the last time. Should I just show some of the style stuff, or?
Yeah, and please just could you make a summary on what it is for people who are actually coming back to Imba after a while?
So it is essentially just a way to apply styles inline to elements directly in Imba, and also to create global and scoped style rules with an Imba syntax, like directly in the language. So instead of adding styles either through external style sheets or through the CSS comment blocks that we had before, I've basically moved that styling inside of the main language, so to speak. So it started out just as inspired by Tailwind. It started out just as a bunch of utility classes that you could add to inline components to add these basic constrained types of styles, like what kind of, whether an element is a block or a flex box or a grid, and the color of it, and like predefined utility classes, just like in Tailwind. And that was already, that felt pretty good to use after I had experimented with the syntax. But you will at some point, you will need to drop down into CSS again. Like you can't do everything with these utility classes. And since we're not constrained the same way a library like Tailwind is, we're essentially allowed to invent new syntax. So it made a lot more sense to actually take the essence and the ideas from Tailwind and other utility frameworks, and then just integrate that with the full CSS, the full power of CSS. So I could go through like just a few examples. The syntax highlighting here is kind of broken, so it won't look that good. But essentially the current syntax for it, for inline elements, is that you, in Imba you have these, as we all know, you have these classes like like you can panel something. They are separated by dots. And you can also do dynamic classes by using curly braces. So this is essentially like if you have an expression here, it will add a class on the tag with the name of that expression. So we added a different syntax for this, where you have dot and then just regular parentheses. And you can look at whatever you write inside of here. You can look at that as kind of an inline anonymous style class. So you have a bunch of style properties. You can use whatever. I can just try to show basic example.
Could you zoom in on the code, or could you make the font bigger? Maybe?
Yeah, sure. I can probably just zoom in, but I can also move it. I think there are some problems still with the service worker on V2, and I haven't really solved that yet. So I can look into it. See here. So just to show things here, I can zoom in and remove the.
Nice.
Maybe I should still show the console. I'm gonna just. So whatever you write inside of here, you can use any kind of real CSS, like regular CSS. You can separate the different stylings, like font, weight, bold, using semicolon, like in CSS, but you can also skip them. So you can essentially just separate them by space, which is, I would recommend to be like the what do you call it? Like the official style guide would recommend using spaces for separating these properties in inline tags.
Yeah.
So the whole point here is that this kind of looks like an inline style where you actually apply these properties directly to the elements.
Mm.
But if you look in the inspector, you will see that it is essentially creating an anonymous style, an anonymous class, or a generated class name with the properties, and then it has set that class name on the element. And the main reason for this is basically reusability. So when you use these in templates, you don't set these style properties of the elements in all the instances of a component. And it also allows for more fancy features. And that is one of the cool things of Tailwind, is that they generate a bazillion classes, so that you can set classes for specifically for, like, set this color when element is hovered and stuff like that. So for that we have style property modifiers. I'm not sure the naming conventions we are going to end up using. I guess when we write the documentation, we'll figure that out and try to be consistent when we reference different concepts. So right now I'm probably not that consistent. I might end up calling them a bunch of different things throughout this explanation. But the whole point is that you can set stuff like, so color colon red, and you can do color dot and then a bunch of different modifiers. So hover it is one of them. So this basically says that the color should be red, and when you hover, the color should be black. So if you look at this example now, is this running? Let me see. I'm using the playground from I'm using the buggy playground from my local host, so I'll just see if something happened. Yeah, there was some weird glitch there. So you see now that when you hover this, the element becomes black. So this is the basic idea of these inline styles. It makes it very easy to add small style stuff throughout your components directly inline. Where was I? But sometimes, as you know, if you've worked with something like Tailwind, you might often end up with a huge bunch of inline styles for various elements, and that becomes quite messy quickly. So it's important to also be able to pull out styles that you repeat over and over out from these inline things. So I don't have any good example right here, but I can probably find one.
I think you have some of the colors, don't you? Like, if I remember correctly.
Colors?
Yeah, I think I saw some examples where.
Yeah, we have. I'll get back to that, because, like, in addition to general CSS, we also support a bunch of constraints where we have a kind of a theme that you can configure, where we have already predefined a bunch of colors, right now they're just copied or borrowed from Tailwind. And we have a bunch of convenience properties and aliases that makes it easier to do a lot of the things that you usually use CSS for in web applications. I feel that I wasn't quite ready to do this whole tour right now, so it's
no worries. But
chaotic.
But if you go back to the colors now, just a moment there. I think no, you were almost there in the
here.
colors here. Yeah, isn't this what you were referring to, the CSS keyword and then the name and then like?
No, what I was going to explain was the way you can actually. So I can just go through the documentation here. So you can do these inline styles.
Mm.
We also have some powerful new CSS properties, like we've extended CSS kind of with a few specific properties like layout, text, and a few others that allows you to much more concisely describe the layout of your components. Like very often you end up writing, always having a position, you always have a display property and a bunch of other things like overflow. Is it going to clip? Is it going to be scrollable? The layout property, which isn't documented really right now, is a shorthand for setting a bunch of these different layout related properties all at once. So, and we have, this is just so messy.
No
we also
worries.
have shorthand aliases for often used properties like padding, margin, stuff like that. So I think I can show some of, so aliases for padding, for example, is you have P for padding, you have PL, PR, PT, PB. Those are just straight up aliases for existing CSS properties. But you also have PX and PY, which are really useful because they set both padding left and padding right at the same time, and padding top and padding bottom. And the same goes for margin. So if I go back to an example here, so weird, the preview stops working all the time. So if I have this panel thing here, you can see that you could do like P0. Now it has no padding and it has no border gray 200. This is, I can talk about this later. These are the predefined nice colors that we ship with the built-in theme. So P10 pixel, that is padding the whole thing, but PX would be just padding the both the sides, and PY would be top and bottom. So we have a bunch of aliases. Those are still kind of in flux. We are working on them, changing them, making sure all of them make sense before launch. Go back to the here. So yeah, the next thing I wanted to talk about was that sometimes these styles become messy. I think we have an example here where you have a panel and where you essentially end up with a huge bunch of inline styles. Sometimes it makes sense to start moving those out into the component body. And this is what you can do here. So in addition to prop and def and get and set and attr, we now have a CSS keyword that you can use here. So I can simply just write css.tab and then add the styling here, and it will generate a scoped style rule for styling everything with the class name tab inside of app panels. So then you can start like moving. Now I basically replaced all of this with just that class inside here. And you can also nest these. So as you can see here, I had an inline conditional style where I just set color blue and background blue if page equals item. So I can move that out as well. So now I have, like you did in Imba 1, I basically toggle the active class name of this div based on whether page equals item. And then I've added a style here as well, which is people will be familiar with this coming from Sass and Less and basically all the CSS dialects or preprocessors. So ampersand here basically represents the current selector. So this is the same as writing a new, I could write a new thing here where it's just CSS tab active, which would be the same. But sometimes it makes sense to allow nesting. You don't want to encourage people to nest everything, because then you end up with these huge complex style rules with a lot of specificity and where it's difficult to really see what's going on. But for these simple examples here, it makes sense in my opinion. So the syntax, I might end up supporting curly braces as well, but the syntax right now is that you can either do like the selector, an equal sign, and then the properties, or you can indent it. So these two are essentially the same. The reason I haven't, it seems very natural to just support curly braces. The only reason I haven't done that just yet is that I am considering allowing curly braces, at least inside inline styles, to also allow dynamic parts of the styling. So you can imagine doing something like this, and where this is actually a property on the component itself. Yeah, just to run through it, we shouldn't spend too much time on this. We also have.
No, actually, I think it's a good idea to spend a lot of time on it, considering it's new and people actually do care. I think
but it's also,
a lot of
it's also
cool.
still, some of it is, it's still kind of in flux. So
yeah, and it like yeah, if we remove stuff, like nothing is released yet. So I think it's good to just showcase it, and it doesn't really matter what doesn't exist in the actual release. Like, because if people get to try out some of this stuff now, it's I think that's better. And then it's always good to get some feedback.
Yeah, that's true. So just, it annoys me that this doesn't work at all now. I have no idea why. So another cool thing is that since we are essentially, our goal is to create a version of CSS that is truly optimized, again, for writing web applications concisely and cleanly. And CSS is in my opinion, a pretty nice idea. But over the years, they have added a lot of new concepts, and they've had to stay constrained to the syntax and the concepts they started with. So when they added support for transforms, it wasn't possible for them to add a bunch of different properties, or it might have been possible, but they ended up with this transform property. That makes a lot of sense when you do complex transforms and custom transform matrices and things like that. But for most regular use cases, people just want to allow to scale and rotate and offset elements quite easily. So in Imba, in the inline, in the style syntax here, you can still do like transform manually and do whatever you want. But we also have a bunch of, again, extended properties that do the same things behind the scenes. So we have X, Y, Z for setting the translate offsets. We have rotate, we have skew X, skew Y, scale, scale X, scale Y. All of this is, again, inspired by Tailwind, but this allows us to really easily set these kind of effects. And it's really powerful in combination with the style property modifiers, because here, like the button you see here, we essentially say that when it's hovering, scale it to 1.2. And the reason it's animated now is that you can see that at the top of this file, I've just defined a global style rule that sets these styles for every button element. And one of them is transition with duration and, again, a custom easing. We can get back to that, but in addition to ease in, ease out, Imba ships with all of the regular CSS easings that you would see, like like these types of easings.
Nice.
And again, the tooling is not at all ready for this. I haven't really worked on the tooling part of the style stuff just yet. I've spent time finishing the styles, but the tooling, when we get autocomplete for all of this, and when you like just hover the easing keywords, you can actually see a preview of the easing curves. There's so many cool things we can add for this. But yeah, it's very powerful for these types of regular effects. And if or when we also add support for interpolating actual dynamic values into the styles, then it also becomes really powerful for if you have some sort of draggable element. Let's say you could just data y, etc. So if you wanted to yeah, easily even make these types of styles declarative in your views. Yeah, we have some extensions for transitions as well. So one of the bad things about CSS is the syntax for transitions. If you want to transition like all of the colors, like actual background, text color, border color, things like that, in with one duration and one easing, and then you want to style opacity or transform with another duration or another easing, it's essentially not possible. Or you have to end up writing a huge list of transition things, or you have to just like transition property and then all the properties, and then you have to write transition delay, transition duration, transition easings. The whole point here is that using like declaring the same duration and the same easing for a bunch of properties and a different duration and a different easing for one or more other properties is a huge mess. It results in tons and tons of CSS. So again, inspired by Tailwind, Imba natively supports some shorthands that represents a bunch of properties. So we have like, if you write none of these, it defaults to something we call styles, if I remember correctly, which is, I can try to just look at the, this is just some behind the scenes stuff for the, you see, no, these aren't themable, so styler. Here are, by the way, here is a list of the current aliases. Let me see. Yeah, so in transitions, we have, these are the current groups that we have. We have styles, which is essentially all colors, as well as box shadow, opacity, and transform. Then you can also specify just sizes, which is width, height, left, top, right, bottom, margin, padding, and a bunch more that I haven't added just yet. And then just the colors as well. And that's another neat thing that is much easier to solve now that we can actually extend the functionality. What else is there? Not sure there's so much more to go through. Again, we can, we also have, so yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think this looks really cool. I took a deep dive into Tailwind. We have a course on Scrimba, which I looked at. So I tried using it in a couple of apps, and I'm definitely sold on that. Like it looks messy. It feels great when you actually use it. And then it's like, it feels so much better when you're actually writing now. And I tried using the newest Imba alpha version and trying to translate some of the Tailwind examples. That was, there were some challenges. So I need to experiment more. But one thing I was worried about when I see this is like, aren't there some ambiguity there? For example, here in the, if we look at line 8 and where you have text MD, like, can't you, if you can use space or semicolon, like, aren't there some CSS properties that you use there that would cause like we don't know what's actually going on. For example, if you have some padding and you're using multiple values in there, and then you have some space in there, like, so that's one of the things I'm
Yeah,
not sure
no,
about.
yeah, it's actually, so if I go here and then do P for padding, so P
Yeah.
except if you do just one, it's so annoying that this breaks all the time. So if you just do a single argument or parameter or whatever you want to call it, then it applies padding to the whole thing, right?
Yeah.
But if you do two or more, like if you just do two, it will do the first one as top and bottom, and the second one as left and right. And that works here as well. So it works for all kinds of properties, because now I could again do like color red, and is actually fully parsable. There is no ambiguity here, but it is kind of tricky to do the parsing. It even supports, like, there are a few properties in CSS that supports comma separated values. So font family is one of them. You have transition, box shadow, backgrounds, where you can apply multiple backgrounds, multiple shadows, multiple fonts, etc. That works as well, but that starts to look quite weird, because then you have like font family, monospace, then, or Arial monospace, and then a color. This still parses, as you can see, the syntax highlighting works, and it does parse correctly as well. But yeah.
So, but what if the Arial had single quotation marks? Would that just break everything now?
That should work as well. But now I somehow end up breaking the whole thing here all the time. So I just need to look into that. But if you look at this right here, you will see that it applies everything correctly.
And the numbering system, like, can you like choose, like, at least for the colors with the shades? Like, I saw that you don't have a dash in some of them. Like, what happens if you add a dash?
So that's a discussion Eric and I have had ongoing for a while, like trying to come up with the right, should we have, initially we just copied Tailwind, which uses the blue 200 kind of notation. That was again taken from Material UI, I think. I just played around with just not having that dash at all. And as Eric said, we did recently, we have also added like this. Just, we're not going to end up shipping support for all of them, but it's very useful to actually add support and then use it a lot, just to see what feels right. The only downside of doing this, in my opinion, is that you won't, if people want to use Material UI things, then they should probably use this syntax or something, because Material UI also defines 50 values for the different colors. So you have blue 100 and blue 50, and blue 100 would be blue 1 in our system, and then blue 50. Eric said it could be blue 0, which I kind of agree with, but it's also not completely right. But yeah, that is one of the things that is just hasn't landed completely yet. Right now, you can't even extend and change the colors yourself, but that's the whole point, that you are going to be able to do that in your own theme configuration. But again, so the whole idea of this style support was to do the same thing as Tailwind. But as you said, the main experience for everyone who's actually tried and started using Tailwind is that it looks really messy, but it works great when you get used to it. So the idea of Imba here is that we want to do the same, but we want it to look beautiful from the start. So it's supposed to look nice and work really nice.
Yeah, so I'm not sure how that's gonna be a challenge, at least if you push in the concise direction.
Yeah, it depends on what you call beautiful. So the main challenge I have with Tailwind is that you end up with a huge bunch of properties directly inline. So one of the one of the things that will look nicer is that you can, as we talked about, you can actually extract styles into actual style rules like this.
Mm.
And that we can, I haven't completely like decided how we want to do the modifiers and stuff, but since Tailwind is constrained to actual CSS classes, so a lot of it is just hacks. So we can use any kind of symbol. We can separate them however we like, and we can also add these, allow for these nested things. I think I've always been of that opinion that I really do think that these shorthand properties are much better. Like when you started using something, take an example like BG instead of background. Yeah, it looks cryptic for a very short time until you learned it. But after you, as long as the aliases are natural, as long as they are pretty consistent, then it is much better to use them than not, because the less code you have, the easier it will be to understand. That's, in my opinion, that's like, I know that you shouldn't call your variables by single letters and go all that way, but if you have BG versus background, it's not the same as a variable, because BG will always represent background. It's kind of like using an emoji for expressing a lot of words in a single character. When you started learning that language, it will be much easier to gloss through a component or some styles and understand what's going on, instead of having to look through a bunch of different lines and yeah.
Yeah, it makes sense. At
Yeah.
least if it's consistent, that like you can almost guess the right thing by just thinking a little bit about it.
Yeah. So yeah, and as I was going to say, that after starting to use this, I've converted the whole V2 site over to using these styles. There are essentially no style sheets left there. I've actually gotten rid of a ton of CSS. Things are much clearer, and it's just a joy to work with when you know that all the styling this is applied is just right there in the same file. And it's not even just in the same file, because that was a problem with CSS blocks. I think that, yeah, you had it in the same file, but it was essentially like two different contexts. You had to jump up and down to the CSS block and back, and you lost the context. When it's right there in the tag trees, it's just so easy to do stuff. So just look at the site here. If you do, so now I changed the viewport size, and it automatically like changed the way the menu works. It pops out, stuff like that. You see the layout of the IDE changes with the sizes. All of this is done with the style syntax in Imba, and it's just much more concise than it would ever be in CSS, because we use things like the breakpoint modifiers, where if I do BG LG, it will only have this property when the screen size is larger than XYZ. So I think I have, so these are the breakpoints, again, taken from Tailwind. Thank you, Tailwind. We've basically just borrowed a ton of concepts from you, tried to improve upon them. So you have these breakpoints so that you can really concisely apply specific styling for specific screen sizes. So yeah, there's just a bunch of things that makes CSS a joy to work with. I really do think that this is, Imba 2 is already a huge improvement from Imba 1, but the whole integration of CSS like deeply into the language as well is just icing on the cake. It's going to be a fantastic way to create apps.
Nice, great work. So just to cover it quickly, like the IDE, just mentioned that, like,
yeah.
So
the
there's
IDE.
Yeah,
this is just for presenting playground examples and stuff in for Imba 2. It's the editor itself is based on Monaco, like VS Code, and we have a live preview that for some reason isn't really working now, that updates instantly. We also have, yeah, console and things. That's especially nice for, this is just just a hack for now, but for the documentation for the examples on this site, we also have some special, like if you add some special prefix to comments, it will essentially rewrite that part of the code during compilation so that it automatically console logs the output of the following expression, and it also shows like it's a rich rich console where you can actually see the
Nice.
yeah.
Do you see the DOM elements basically?
Yeah, and it's tailored for teaching the language and examples as clearly as possible.
So this is also something people can use later, like if they're teaching Imba.
Yeah, definitely. And it makes sense to eventually, like we've created Scrimba, so it makes sense eventually to utilize Scrimba or a next version of Scrimba a lot for teaching Imba. And then we might end up like porting or adjusting the stuff in Scrimba so that you can do things like this there as well. Nice. So we will see. The examples are there are a ton of files missing. I'm still working on adding the natural sections there, and then I'm going to plow through and just try to add examples for most of the things. Getting back to the documentation, it's kind of a few different efforts now, which makes it kind of messy. So Eric has started with writing his guides, which are kind of like for beginners going through the concepts. I started adding some more reference types of guides. There's probably some duplication between the efforts. And in addition to this reference, I've also started adding the IDE, the actual like code examples. So right now I'm kind of wondering the approach at least I should take, because for me, thinking about just a reference, like thinking about the Eric's guide at the moment, I do think it makes sense to kind of make the code examples in the playground follow the same structure as the reference. So instead of reinventing the section names and how we chunk up the different concepts, I think it makes sense to basically mirror the same outline for both the reference and the examples. And that will make it easier as well to do fancy things like just coupling the playground examples to the reference.
Yeah, I'm not sure, like but I thought you wanted the examples to be like just have as many as possible. If you couple them to the documentation, that's gonna
it's not about
constrain them.
But it doesn't make sense. Yeah, but you can also, like, in addition, we have tons of, we were going to add full application examples of specific components, like advanced weird stuff, different, all sorts of things we can add here. But when it comes to, like, when you see the styling section here and you see basics, modifiers, layout, sizing, typography, all of that, it definitely makes sense for those parts to at least follow the same headings that you have here in the reference. It doesn't make sense to have almost the same, because you end up, basically, it's more like you don't want to, there's no reason to come up with a grouping that makes sense two different times in two different locations, where they actually, because you are going through the same concept, so they end up having almost the same structure, but maybe not completely.
Yeah, okay, now I see,
yeah. And it's not sense. Like, okay, so here in layout, we have some random documentation. It's not like the files in IDE should contain the same things. In layouts inside here, you might have a bunch of different example files showing different things, but at least try to maintain the same section naming across references.
Yeah, it makes sense. And there's actually also some overlap already, right, with the naming.
Yeah.
That's probably going to make it cleaner and also for the learner.
Yeah, but maybe again, I'm unsure here. So maybe the best way forward is that I focus on the examples, like adding a bunch of examples for all kinds of things. That's also useful for me because it really both actually exposes bugs that are there, because things like the style implementation is quite buggy still because it's very early. But it also exposes inconsistencies and problems when I try to write examples to show certain things. And I'm not that good at writing documentation, but if I actually end up creating all these tiny examples, basically explaining every part of Imba that I can remember, then I hope that will be very helpful for you and Eric and hopefully others that might want to kind of take those examples and bake them into a reference documentation or
I think
guide.
that's a great idea. There's no point in like forcing yourself to write documentation if the process is painful and you're not comfortable with it. I think that like having a lot of examples is going to be useful, definitely. And I think some of the magic, like if you also cover that, like things that are just you don't know this because you actually haven't read the code or you haven't seen how this was built. So I think covering those things would be nice, at least the ones that make sense. And having as much, like so many examples. It's better to have too many examples than too little in this case, because we can also like cut down on the examples if it turns out this is you don't really need this much, it's too verbose.
So for me, it's probably, it pains me to see how messy the documentation is currently, but I just need to remember that this is just, all of it is work in progress. It's going to look a lot cleaner and different when we're finished, but it's probably useful for me then to just look away from this and just keep adding things to the playground.
Yeah, I think that also makes sense.
Another cool thing for development, by the way, is that I've added, like, these are the examples here. If you actually save, then it will save in the repository, so that it's easy to go through, add examples directly in the playground, and then and tweak them, and then when you save, you can afterwards just push to the repository.
Yeah, now we just need to add new button somewhere. If it's running locally,
and that's coming, obviously.
Great.
Yeah.
So, but if we get back to the topics, let's see. I can't really see the topics. Yeah, so maybe we can just cover, like you've done the walkthrough, the new syntax highlighting. So we're using Imba document, and that's also being used in the V2 now, right?
Yeah, but not for, like, we're still using a TM language for VS Code, and that's really messy because it's based on TypeScript TM language, which is huge, and it has just a ton of rules trying to I don't remember the words, but it's essentially doing a ton of complex parsing, because initially VS Code didn't support something like semantic coloring. But now that it does, I think they will move to a much simpler TM language, and we should do that as well, because it's actually, it's you can even see that it's slow when it's highlighting large documents now. But yeah, the syntax highlighting is still it's not finished, but it's working okay. So it's not a showstopper for me when developing things, at least.
Cool. So we did the walkthrough. Yeah. And so what do you think then about Eric's proposal with the document?
I think for me, I think it's more important. Also reading through his documents and talking to you, it's clear for me that because Imba hasn't been really documented well at all by me, like the creator, then it is easy to write things that simply aren't true or that are just not the best style, not how you should do things. So I think for me, the main effort should probably be to create all these examples and
I get that for your part, but like so the advanced sections and all of that, so we'll just leave that as is, right?
Yeah.
And then maybe someone else will write them. We'll just see, or maybe they won't be added before later.
Yeah.
But one thing I'm worried about with the documentation is like I didn't know you wanted to focus on the examples, so I was worried that we would have too many different styles. But if you're focusing on the examples, and if we embrace Eric's approach, even if it becomes too simple, we can still add new sections and just drill down, or maybe reorganize and say, hey, this part is actually meant for people who are new to this. So you can skip all of that and go straight here, and then back reference whenever it's relevant. So I think it's going to be good to have that someone is holding your hand and walking through the path, and we can always clean up if Eric explains things in a certain way, or if this is too simplified or it doesn't make any sense, we can give feedback on that. So I'm not that worried about having a beginner's approach from that's a big focus. I think that's going to be very beneficial, and it's better to over explain in that part, I think. And but one thing I was thinking, I'm hoping we can get back to that later, is like if we can actually focus on like this part is for beginners, this part is for intermediate, and this part is for people who want to contribute to Imba. Like having a clear, I think I'm being signed out of Zoom. Please don't, I'm going to leave the dialogue up and not touch it. Hopefully it doesn't kick me out. Sorry, I lost my train of thought.
The documentation, the guides and the intermediates, advanced, beginner.
So I think that's something we can come back to, because like I had a lot of like pictures in my head on how the documentation should look and some drafts on things, but I think I want to scrape that. And if we just have one unified direction, let's try what Eric says there, and do what you're saying too with the examples, and then see how that looks like later. So I don't think the documentation, like I'm going to try to embrace his approach, and then we can just deal with the inconsistencies later. So
I agree.
Cool.
VS Code extension status, there's not much more to say because I haven't done anything on it since the last time. I think after this style stuff is completed and I've added enough examples for you and Eric to really get going with more documentation, I'm going to get back to the VS Code stuff, mostly to improve the support for the styles, just like auto completions and some hover details and stuff like that. Bundling, we're still for Imba, for the V2 website, we're using Webpack. The default is using Rollup. I haven't had the time to look really into it yet, but I really do like the idea of Snowpack. Like the concept, it fits Imba really nicely. And actually for the, even if most things aren't working here, for this playground now, it's actually using native web modules. So the HTML is just including the let's see if I have a real example here with so it's actually just adding script type module with the src app.imba. The only thing here is that the service work we have behind the scenes will compile the Imba file on the fly to JavaScript. But the point is that if you import stuff here, like import some other Imba file, there is no bundling going on. It is just like Snowpack. It is essentially just using the native browser support for modules.
Yeah, this is cool. I saw this in Deno and was using that in some private projects. I was hoping, actually, I was trying to propose something like this. So this is cool to finally get it there.
So the thing Snowpack solves, because we could really easily create our own kind of web server with hot reloading and just on the fly translation from Imba to JavaScript and stuff. But the main benefit of Snowpack is that it actually helps you make all sorts of other libraries support the same stuff as well, because that was the problem. Both just using rollup, there was a problem that there are a lot of just client-side packages that don't really work when bundled with rollup.
Mm.
And if we wanted to go the whole native module thing, then it would be very difficult to import a lot of external dependencies, and that's the main benefit of Snowpack.
I tried Snowpack because I was considering just trying it out, since I was skeptical to the Tailwind stuff.
Yeah.
Positively surprised afterwards. So I thought maybe Snowpack also is something positively surprised.
Yeah.
So I tried it, and I wasn't really impressed, to be honest, because like I used one of their Svelte examples and their Vue examples, and I was expecting speed. This is going to be fast. And whenever I changed markup, that worked fine. But whenever I changed CSS stuff in Vue or in Svelte, it didn't really refresh, and it didn't really refresh properly. So I had some weird stuff where it looked like the styles just disappeared. Like, for example, you have the SVG logo from Svelte, and it refreshes, and then all of the style is gone, so you get a big SVG.
Okay, yeah. That's probably a bug though, but yeah.
Yeah, so maybe it's too early. I think we should, I think we should defer that. Like, it shouldn't have any impact on the Imba V2 release.
Yeah, but we have to have at least a plan for how people are supposed to bundle things in Imba V2. So you could start with just showing some Webpack configs and some.
But do we really need that? Like,
I think it's very bad if we don't even have a recommended way to bundle your application.
No, that's not what I'm saying. Like to have we have currently Parcel is the template, right? We're using Parcel. We're using Rollup.
Yeah.
We started with Parcel and then moved away from that and went to Rollup. Why can't we use Rollup for the final release? What's like?
It's kind of like the reason I jumped back to Webpack. Like Rollup is problematic for a bunch of packages that are not supported in Rollup. I think we can still use Rollup, I guess. But at least we need to make sure it works.
Like if we provide two templates, like here is a template for Rollup. If you do only front end stuff, the Rollup stuff does work. It has worked very nicely for me, at least. And the only problems I've had when I've tried to use like Node server-side modules, which I want to use on the client side, that's when I've met issues. So if we just provide like a Webpack full stack example, or one where you can do whatever you want basically as a starter, then I think that's more than enough. Like just having this is a repository you can reuse for your project, or here's an example how we have done it in Webpack. So I think that's more than enough, in my opinion, at least.
I guess it is. And at some point down the road, we're probably going to need to at least partially roll something on our own to support. I talked with Eric about this. It would be so nice to eventually have hot module reloading that works really nicely for the style stuff, so that it will actually do hot module reloading and just not reload the whole example, so that you can apply styles, write your styles and immediately see the results. And you could even hook this into a deeper level where you can essentially, like, even without saving, you can see the updates. Because as Eric talked about, you have, I can't show it here, but a VS Code extension. Maybe I could show it somewhere. Let me see. Loops, where you can just, where you can essentially, what was the syntax again? So you have a VS Code extension called Incrementer or something, where you can just by a keyboard shortcut, you can increment and decrement numbers and stuff. And that's really not cool for the inline styles, where you can essentially just go to blue one. Imagine if you could just immediately, like instantly, even when just editing in the editor, you can see the updates to the styles, for example, for sizes and paddings and colors and all these properties that you can increment or decrement. But yeah, that's just a tangent.
Yeah, it's really cool. So let's wrap up with the final topic,
Yeah.
unless you have anything else.
Nope.
So the release schedule. So like
Yeah.
I've definitely tried to push to get the early release, and
Yeah.
like if we can we don't need a roadmap or something like that or commit to anything publicly, but I think we should like start either we have a target like let's do something early this year, or let's just keep it open until the end of year. I would prefer if we have an early target versus keeping on all the way and adding stuff, because it is like it is straining on the motivation to be in the that the V2 is in development all the time.
Yeah, it's not restraining my motivation. But I do agree that we definitely need to ship it in some ways as soon as possible. But we do need to, like, I'm extremely happy. All of the things we've added to V2, in retrospect, I'm just extremely happy that I ended up spending the time to add it and implement it and experiment with it instead of shipping a version 2 before that, because it's very a lot of these things are very difficult to add later on. Like you would essentially end up doing Imba 3 instead down the road. So a perfect example is the styles. There were a bunch of people talking about it in the issues. It was clear that styles is something we kind of want. I multiple times said to you that, yeah, sure, we'll do that later after V2. When I started really using V2 for creating applications, the new Imba site, one of them, I really felt all of the problems with CSS blocks. I've started using Tailwind. I see the benefits of that. Spending the time to experiment with that and come up with this thing is just, to me, I think it's a huge improvement upon for Imba, and I think it's extremely important that it gets added to for V2. That said, I think it's basically we don't have that. So CSS was the last like big thing that we've talked about for a long time, and we're considered like, when do we want to look into that? We don't have a lot of new complicated things left. I think it's a really good sign that what we have been talking about most of the time now is essentially examples and documentation and the playground and essentially how to teach people a language. So I do think that's a good sign that things are moving closer to a release, at least a beta release, pretty soon. I think it's just about now finishing up the examples and fixing bugs, and maybe I want to talk about that as well. Just figuring out a few more things with components, like how we can possibly extend native tags and how we can extend SVG elements and stuff like that. But that's just technical challenges to overcome. I think most, or essentially all of the concepts are in here now. Some of them, some minor parts might need a little more massaging to get right. But now I'm essentially in documentation mode already. And yeah, I think that is at least a sign that we're not talking about next year. We're talking about in a few months at most, with where we spend time documenting and spend time trying to
I don't know, like
time
really goes fast, like suddenly it's January. So like I think with the styles, like everything that's been added, like from what I've seen, is really good. And this is one of the things that did come up early on, like even before Imba 2 started, right? That's having a way to do styles. Like we even did look at Tailwind or did talk about it at some point, but it was, So I think it's cool. And what I'm worried about is that stuff is going to pop up. Like, this is something new we should try out, or well, we should try this, and then it just keeps on pushing the release. And
but I think, like, if things are, there might be even more things popping up, but I think they're always popping up for a reason. And our goal here is to essentially create like the by far the best way to create web applications. And I don't think there will be many more things popping up, but at the same time, I am of the opinion that if something pops up, it might be worth exploring that.
Yeah, but if we end up exploring a lot of things, like a lot of time is going to be spent on that. So,
but if we go back a few months, like, and we were thinking about what kinds of things might pop up, like what kinds of things am I considering for version 2 and the future. I think that list has gotten a lot shorter over the last 3-4 months. I think, just as an anecdote, I remember I talked to what's his first name? Like Ashkenaz, the guy who created the CoffeeScript. And so we talked about, and he liked Imba and a lot of the concepts, and he said, like, in his opinion, Imba was currently the state-of-the-art language in web development, but the only thing it lacked was like a deeper integration between styling and the logic and markup. Because Imba and React, obviously, like essentially all of the frameworks over the last years have really pulled the markup back into the logic. And Tailwind has sort of started trying to pull the styling back into the markup. Imba now tries to do all of them, and I think it does really well. If there are more concepts that are going to pop up, I do think they are probably like important problems that we need to solve. I don't think there will be entirely new concepts. It will be more like, so when we actually create real applications, this is a big problem. This makes Imba 2 awkward to use. So yeah, I'm just going around and around here. I think I'm happy that I have not listened too much to advice and actually spent time trying to experiment and follow down some
rabbit
holes that have essentially ended up being extremely valuable. Like Scrimba was initially just a rabbit hole trying to teach Imba. So yeah.
Cool. So do you think we're going to keep on bumping the @pre version, or have you thought like moving it out of alpha to
yeah, so I think the next natural step now is to focus on the examples. Hopefully you can contribute there as well together with Eric. No, the documentation. I'm going to do examples, you plow through and do documentation, and then at the same time Eric and I are talking about the style stuff, just fixing up aliases and making it pretty consistent. After that, I think we are ready to move to beta. And at the point we move to beta, I think it makes sense to really make that kind of the public version of Imba. Because you were skeptical about that before, that you talked about, like you run into so many issues using Imba 2.
Yeah, so some of the things I've experienced are actually my fault. It's just that the context switching between Imba 1 and Imba 2.
Yes.
So I have, some issues are with me on the person in front of the computer. So like now I haven't used the newest styling stuff a lot, but I can use Imba 2 for what I want currently. It's just been like things are different, and the lack of examples have been in the test repository, but like a site to go to, I think that's helped a little bit now. So I haven't experienced any new issues. Only even I had issues with event handling. Now that's working great with the new syntax.
So I've the v2.imba, I always probably the first, like, or the it's not that big, but it's the biggest full app that I've done just in fully in Imba 2. And to me, it's like, it's already a huge improvement upon Imba 1, like a huge one. And there are a few issues that we might discuss another time. It's mostly about the constraint that you always have to define unique tag names that become full web components. I would like to allow the local exportable and importable tags that we have in Imba 1, and I have an idea for how to do that really easily. But other than that, it's just, yeah, everything feels better. And the fact that I could do this as quickly as I could, I think is a huge sign that we are pretty close to launch. Like, and I'm not opposed to launching early. I'm just opposed to launching where there are obvious flaws in the concepts, like where there are obvious pain points that you run into using it in the real world.
Oh, I think it's good that we keep on pushing the goalpost. I just hope we don't push it too far, like where we try to get too much stuff in. Even this, like this syntax here, if you go back to the data, this is actually pretty cool. When I saw it initially, I thought, wow, what's the point of it? But you can actually group, if you have a static site, you're grouping some data. This looks really nice.
Yeah.
Cool. So is there anything else, or what do you want to talk about in the follow-up in 2 weeks?
Hopefully we're gonna just continue discussing the documentation. Maybe we can schedule it later in the evening so that Eric can join as well, and we can actually do the next meetup as more of a walkthrough of the documentation and talk about and discuss what we like and what we don't like and how we want to organize it. Hopefully within that time, I probably won't be able to spend too much time on this because we have a lot of other things going on. But I will try to land more of the style aliases and minor things there, and add a bunch more examples. And then after that, maybe, not the next meetup, but maybe the next after that, then we can hopefully go through the tooling again. And yeah, I'm very optimistic. Like I'm really looking, I see the light at the end of the tunnel now. I see that the release is it's not like a distant concept, a diffuse concept, like sometime in the future. I think moving to beta and actually flipping imba.io over to the V2 site is something we can hopefully do in a month or two.
Nice. I think it's been very good that you actually started on that, because I was a little bit worried about, like, we haven't used Imba V2 in the project yet. Yeah. So.
And after that, it probably makes more sense to say that, yeah, the language is working well enough, and then spend time creating these other parts, like the data model library and state management, all of that stuff, and do that later, like not as part of the language, obviously.
Yeah, great work.
And by the way, I didn't mention that, but I've also fixed and improved quite a few things on the V2 router, which is now baked into, like included in the actual Imba repository. So all of the routing here is actually happening through the router. By the way, there are shortcuts for moving through the documentation, and enter opens the IDE and S closes it.
Nice.
And you can also use arrows to move through the examples in the IDE as well, in the playground. But yeah, all the routing here is done with Imba routes. So you see that it changes. So when you click, I can start anew. Like when you click these things here, then it will replace the history. It's just using, I can actually pull up the code, I guess, from the, go to the REPL. You can see here that it's essentially, so these are the tabs. So we have a root2 property with a replace modifier, and that essentially says that when you click these, it will replace the state. It won't add to the stack. So when I go back, I just go back to the previous one. If you change these, then it will actually add to the, so that's a nice example. It didn't work. I need to figure out what that was. Then it will go back. And you also have sticky routes, which is a concept where now things might be broken, but when you go to global here inside of styling and I go back somewhere, if I go back to styling, it will remember the sub path it was at the last time.
Nice.
So already the router supports most of the things that the V1 router supported. And again, we are going to actually document it this time and make it a viable router to use for your simple applications.
Sounds good. So let's wrap up and talk to you soon. So
yeah, see you.
Okay, bye.
Thanks. Bye.